on. I would like to call to order the Lebanon Board of Education meeting for July 17th, 2023. I have the time as 6:01. Everybody please join me for the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mrs. Irvin, roll call, please.
Mr. Lane?
Here.
Mrs. Cope?
Here.
Mrs. Dalton?
Here.
Mrs. Larson?
Here.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Here.
Item number 4, need a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Karen?
Just a second. Nobody's showing up. Who was the second? I'm sorry.
Esther?
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mrs. Dalton?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Item number 5, communications and reports. I don't believe we have any hearing of the public tonight. You're next. No, not yet, just in a second. So there is no hearing of the public. So item B will be presentation of invited guests. Isaac, I'll hand that over to you.
Yeah, so the Lebanon Elks Club is here this evening. They do a lot of work and support the schools, and they wanted to be here tonight to present something to the schools. I think they've got some money or something for a program or whatever it is.
So we'll invite you to the microphone. You can state your name and address and.
My name is Ted Whitaker. I live at 123 Summerfield Lane, Lebanon, Ohio. What do I need to do? I need to turn the mic on. Processing. There we are. That's right. My name is Ted Whitaker. I live at 123 Summerfield Lane. I am a member of the Elks Lodge, number 422, and I do come bearing a gift of $1,300. I'm also the founding member of a bourbon and book club. So we meet once a month, obviously like a book club does, and we had the opportunity to sponsor a burger night where we sold a lot of $5 burgers. And we wanted to give that money to the kids that struggle to pay for their lunches. So we heard that was a need, and we hope that this helps a little bit and represents the membership at large.
We sure appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks a
We
lot.
want to do a picture.
Yeah, let's do a
We would
photo.
love to get Farmer Savers in the picture.
Well, I mean, do I have to wear my hat or not?
If you want to come right up here, we'll do that.
I was not told about the picture. I just want that on the record, please.
Nice job,
We'll step right here in front of this.
Thanks for being
You giving the check to someone? Yes, there we are. Good.
All right, 3, 2, 1.
Thanks, Brad. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. All right.
We'll see you
Thank
up
you.
there.
Try to do it again next year.
That's
awesome. I appreciate
your support with that.
Thanks.
We do want to thank the Lebanon Elks for coming tonight and giving that very nice donation. Moving on to item C is the board committee reports, starting with the student achievement liaison, Mrs. Dalton.
Yes, I don't have anything for this month, but we'll get going. in,
School starts next month, right?
Yes, we'll
You-
get going next month.
You haven't been driving to houses, getting summer updates to students?
Taking the summer off.
Letter B, or item B, is the CAT committee of Roy. I'm going to have Karen give us a quick update here.
Sure. So we have a scheduled meeting this coming week on the 26th, but the state recently passed the biennial budget, and we have a webinar in Columbus on the 1st of August that will talk about those changes. So I'd like to request that we reschedule that CAT committee after that training so we can bring that information back to the committee.
You okay with that? Okay. You have anything else you want to add to Roy, to this one?
And when we reschedule, it's going to be 6 or 7 o'clock PM meeting.
Yes.
Thank you.
It will be evening hours.
So I do know that Jessica sent something out to everybody. Don't feel any pressure to go, but they wanted to make sure we pass it along to superintendent, treasurer, and board. Karen and I will be going. It's a nice team-building exercise to sit through one day where they tell us all about the budget. So you're welcome to attend if you'd like. There's an online option, or you can just wait for us to give you an update. So if anybody wants to go to that, Jessica sent an email about it. We can get you registered.
Okay.
So, from somebody who has attended before, I would recommend waiting for the update from us.
It's riveting,
What's that?
riveting.
It's riveting. It's very, very, very riveting.
Or anything else you want to add? Good. Letter C, legislative liaison, Mrs. Cope.
I'm just going to be brief because some of the things that have occurred lately, we're still waiting on more details. So Governor DeWine signed House Bill 33, which is the fair school funding plan in the budget. So details are still coming in on that. And then Senate Bill 1, which is a restructuring of the Ohio Department of Education. It is bringing it under a cabinet-level agency under the governor. That will be the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce. So
That was included in the budget bill, so it did
it's all like
pass.
that whole,
Yeah.
there's a whole bunch in the budget bill, and I think I actually read a lot of it, and it's a lot of information in there, so.
All of that will be covered in the Senate.
Okay. And letter D, Warren County Career Center Liaison, Mrs. Larson.
Okay, I gave each of you the short version of the minutes for the May and June meetings. I couldn't remember if I'd sent those electronically to you or not, so I wanted to catch up with that. We had a special meeting this past week where the Warren County Career Center will be going on the ballot in November for new construction. We have connections with the OFCC, and it is Warren County Career Center's turn. So we'll be getting more information out to everyone soon.
Is that for a full new facility or
Yes.
renovations?
Yes, we have outgrown the current facility. This past year, we turned away over 200 children, and we just don't have the space.
Yeah.
And a lot of the labs are becoming outdated. The building is over 20 years old, which I think it was built in the 70s, so I'm probably even older than that. It also would give us the possibility of having daytime adult ed, which is very, very needed. So that's, we'll be getting some bullet points out to everyone. In fact, I'd like to invite Joel to come and speak at one of our meetings.
We would love that.
I think it'd be great to have Joel come and speak about it at one of our meetings. Mr. Lane would like for him to be here too.
And we'll have plenty of questions lined up for Mr. King when he shows up.
We have some advantages of it being so close to
Absolutely.
our schools, but would it potentially move further away, or?
No, we have the space.
Oh, okay.
It'll be on the same facility,
Yeah, that's
same
good.
grounds.
Yeah, that's an advantage for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Okay. Item number 6 is the approval of the minutes and signing. I have a motion to approve the minutes of the special meeting from June 30th, 2023.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Mrs. Irvin?
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Mrs. Dalton?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes?
Motion carried.
Item number 7, financial consent items. Karen, I believe I can lump all A through K in here, correct?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So I motion to approve items A through K under financial.
Motion?
Second.
And I'll hand it off to you.
Okay. So there's a lot going on this month in here, but we'll start with our monthly financial reports. This is just taking a look at our May forecast. Wanted to highlight where we're at. So we are at 12 of 12 months. So the box, the green box is showing us this is where we were projected to land. And you can see it's very close to the 2022 actuals where we thought we were going to land. And I'll talk a little bit as we go in where we did actually land. But I want to talk a little bit about how this is going to look moving forward. So in November, I'll come back with an updated forecast. 22 will go away, and we'll add 2028 on the end. So the next forecast, you'll see a very big difference as we add that year and take away a year. But at the end of the day, cash balances were 360,000 more than what we estimated. So very close projection to what we actually accomplished. This shows you where the cash is. We are currently at 144 days as of the end of June, 144 days operating cash, target being 120. So you can see those three colored bars pretty much coincide at the end of the day there. In May, we only have about a month and a half left by the time I get you the forecast, so it should be pretty close to what that forecast looks like in '23. So taking a look specifically at our revenues and expenses, you'll see that we should be at 12 months at 100% of our budget. And for both revenues and expenses, we were at 100% of the budget. So that's great. Revenues were over by about 257,000 and expenditures were under by 102,000. In the scope of the millions that we're doing, that's pretty good. So again, really good estimates there. I wanted to give you a look at last year at this time versus this year and kind of talk through some of those differences, what we're seeing. Property tax-wise, you can see that's the biggest increase on the revenue side. We, from last year to this year, gained about $2.4 million. Talk a little bit about our citizens voted in the substitute levy and that impact if we see that here. Just wanted to reiterate, during the first year of the substitute levy, it collects exactly the same as those 3 emergency levies. So that impact is not here. So just wanted to point that out. So this is,
Sorry, one of the things was some of this went from, we had some big property that went from agricultural to residential because they were beginning to build some housing additions and things. So some of that value was the planned future growth.
and
changing.
the majority after that would be the property tax values have simply increased. And we're at the 20 mil floor, so we get some of that. But it was not the emergency levies that capture the same amount. So looking into the next forecast, I'm curious to see how our software will project that substitute to see what kind of construction has come online. I haven't explored that yet, and I will once we get to the November forecast, but you'll start to see, hopefully, slight increases as that construction is brought online. That 2.4 here, though, that is just property values and some of those agricultural values changing. The others are pretty small compared to the property tax. As you know, our property tax is the majority of our revenue right now. So we can talk through those a little bit if you want, but really the property tax is where we're seeing the significant increase. Now, of course, the state foundation funding with the House bill has shifted some things. We're not sure exactly how much that will change things. We have a few projections. It's looking anywhere from 200 to 300,000 a year that we will increase based on that change. Now, as you know, this coming year, we're going to do some property tax reevaluations. That might change everything in the foundation formula. That is part of the formula. So I'm curious to see how it will land, but right now our software company with the forecasting is rolling over our fiscal year to get that new year's worth of data in there. So once they get that in, I'll start to be able to do some projections. On the expense side, you see the predominant increase here is wages and benefits. Again, just like property taxes are our main revenue driver, our people are our main expense driver. So one of the things we talked about in where this came about, just to give you some idea, last year we had an increase of about 3 million. This year we had about 4.4. So I looked into that a little bit. Last year, we had a negative 0.1% in benefits. This year, we had a 6% increase in benefits. So that's a large difference. Looking into the next year, we've budgeted 10%. It's probably going to be between 6 and 10. So we're probably going to see that kind of percentage change again. And just a note, we have 726 employees at the end of the year. So we have a lot of employees. We have a lot of expense wrapped into that, but that is our resource for our kids. Again, a lot of those other ones are pretty small. The ones, the very bottom there, the other expenditures, that decreased by 1.7 million. That is predominantly how we change the advances. I've said that pretty much every single month. You'll start to see that go away now that the fiscal year is done, and we'll start comparing apples to apples, I'll say. So during our last meeting, Roy asked about the transportation costs. So the transportation department and the business director did a great job pulling together the data, and we wanted to present that to you here. Here are the totals, and I'll talk a little bit about how they came up with these numbers. All of our buses are recorded, any maintenance costs are recorded per bus. So they took the 20 new buses, took the average of the maintenance costs on each of those new buses. Then they picked 20 random buses that were left, and I'd looked at their years. The years are spanning anywhere from 2005 all the way to 2019. So this is a very random choice in which buses. They took the maintenance costs of each of those 20, got an average, compared the two, and you'll see a savings of about $6,800 per bus. So if you multiply that by 20, you're going to see about $136,000 that we've saved this first year in this program. The second option there's really no way to accurately say this is exactly how much we saved because we don't have those old buses, right? So they pulled a second option. They took those 20 new buses, just like the first option, and then they took the average 22 calculated per bus cost. This is the amount that we report to the state on what's called the T2 report. It takes all of our maintenance per bus and it averages that. So this is the amount that we reported to the state. If we compare those two numbers, the savings is still over $6,000 per bus. Again, multiply that by 20, and you'll see about $123,000 in this first year. On the fuel side, we are averaging about 9 miles per gallon. Our old buses are about 6 miles per gallon. So they calculated the cost of that, and this is only on our regular routes. This does not include any field trips. So that would be additional savings. The savings here for this first year was about 56.6 or 56.5, depending on which numbers you're looking at there. So in total, we're estimating $180,000 to $190,000 in savings on this first year. So we're hoping, obviously, over the next 4 years, we're going to continue to see those savings. At the end of that period, we hope to get the 20 brand new buses, and see this cycle start all over again. So that eventually we're cycling out all of our old buses in a normal time frame that keeps our costs significantly lower.
What's the new bus cost?
It will depend on the year. So that's something, as we were trying to figure out how to get you these savings, we were talking about, well, if I purchased 5 buses last year, that cost has increased this year. And so that's not even accounted for here.
Their average, it depends on if it has a wheelchair lift in it or not, but anywhere from $85,000 to $95,000.
So we're saving
The cost of 2
enough
buses.
money to buy 2 buses a year.
Yeah.
That's pretty darn good.
Is it safe to assume that the new buses are getting the longer routes?
So the new buses are going on the longer routes. The new buses are going on majority or all of the sports trips and field trips because we get better gas mileage on them, plus they're more reliable. And so they're getting used a lot, but they're going on the longer routes, and so that's helping probably even better fuel economy than others. So
Very good.
Thank you to the transportation department for, that was a lot of detail for them, so they did great pulling that together.
There's a, if you would like to see the numbers, we can send you the spreadsheet too. Okay. It's an interesting calculation, but good.
Okay, and that's it
That
for
it?
the monthly.
Okay, just to run through the list, item B is amended appropriations. C is amended certificate of estimate resources. D is a list of donations, some pretty, very nice one from the athletic boosters on here, Lebanon Lions Club. Advances,
Real quick, I want to jump in on the advances. So if you remember, back when I first started, we were doing these monthly, and you'd get a very long list. The auditors came in and said, you don't need to do this monthly, do it at the end of the year, and that's it. So this is a list just from the end of June, and we only needed to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 this time, so it's much shorter. But I did want to talk about some of those and what we've discovered. The list is in your packet, but one of the, I'll just go in, they're in no necessary, there's no order here. It's just in a list. So the first one was our student fee fund for art. This was a budgetary thing that I didn't see last year because I wasn't quite in the detail that I am this year. So what had happened last year, they ran a deficit. I copied the budgets over without looking at what they were spending versus collecting. Now, this could be students haven't paid, right? We'll talk about some student fee issues later on, but I carried that forward. So this year, we're going to reduce that budget to make sure we capture and make that positive. So that's that one. The math grades, this is where we implemented a new program and we fronted the cost, but we're collecting the fees over a 5-year period. So we're still in collections for this one. You'll see all 3 Winter Guard programs did end in a deficit balance. We tried really hard to make those positive. And the junior high athletic department ended in a deficit. So I met with, Isaac and I and the high school principal met with Mr. Sershin on the Winter Guard programs, and then I had reached out to Mr. Pantling, our athletic director for the athletic department, and talked about what are we going to do to avoid this, how do we get this fixed. What we discovered was the Winter Guard, as you might suspect, has a lot of unpaid fees. If 1 or 2 families would pay their fees, it would fix all 3 of these balances. And there are more that still need to pay. So moving forward, he's going to implement a payment plan option so that, just like with marching band, it'll be a monthly, you have to pay this amount by this period of the month, or you'll be held out from whatever activity is happening. So we're hoping to collect those fees. I also sent him the list of outstanding currently, so he can work on some collections to get it positive.
So one of the things we talked about is we were going to send a letter from Mr. Sershin and Mr. Reynolds, the high school principal, to the families that still owed, try to explain how the accounting of that program works, explain what the plan is going forward, and ask that they, try to get caught up on the payment from this past year, because we can't spend any money out of that account until it's brought to zero to plan for next year. So there was a communication plan that was agreed upon by Mr. Sershin, the band director, and Mr. Reynolds in terms of sending letters to those families here in the next week. So.
Specifically with the athletic program, the junior high athletic program, we had some change in guard over this last year, and we've had some change in the programs, and Mr. Pantling is kind of taking on both and consolidating. There are some expenses that are both junior high and high school, and so they were trying to figure out which goes in which bucket. So things like track hurdles, both areas use that, so who pays for it? So what we're doing, and part of one of your items to approve here is we ended the high school with a very positive, healthy balance. We're gonna ask that you transfer the amount of the deficit from there to the junior high to cover that. What we think happened was some of those multi-expenses went to the wrong fund. It went to the junior high fund instead of the high school. Over the next year, Mr. Pantley is gonna take a look at that and make sure that it doesn't happen for this coming year.
So can you, a little bit more detail on the math grades 6 through 8, because that's a large number there.
Yes, so I think it was 3 years ago, maybe at this point, we purchased a new math curriculum for grades 6 through 8. We had to pay the company, it was an installment plan for 2 years. We went ahead and paid that. Last year was our last year to pay, but we're charging the families the consumable portion of that, the 009 student fee portion, over the course
time.
of 5 years
Okay.
instead of the 2 years that we had to pay. So it's going to be collected, but it's longer than we had to
Yep.
pay it.
Makes perfect sense. Okay. Item F is the activity purpose and budget statements. Stop me at any time.
Yeah, these are just standard. You'll see these
Okay.
trickle in the next couple months.
Okay, G is a transfer of funds from the class of 22 to LHS Student Council.
This particular transfer is to close the class of 22. Probably a year ago at this point, we closed a bunch of old funds. I want to make sure we maintain that. So we moved everything that was left there, we moved over to student council so that they can benefit, those funds can benefit the entire high school through things like prom and their homecoming, those kind of things. And moving forward, our person who is in charge of the student council, she's talking with some of the other teachers to maybe say, hey, class of 23, what do you want done with these funds? Do you want to move them over? Do you want to donate something to the school for the benefit of the other students? So hopefully we'll have good plans moving forward.
Were there any connections with the class of 22 to see if they wanted to donate something else to the school, or was it not possible
Once-
to get a hold of them?
Once they graduate, they're not allowed to do anything with the funds.
Really? Huh, interesting.
Yeah, so it has to be within the school year.
Okay, thanks.
It's a nice little item for their last meeting, right? For their last student council meeting together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
H is a transfer of funds that you already described, the
Yes.
athletic department and the junior high athletic department. I is the approved Lebanon City Schools student fee schedule.
So this is something you all will see hopefully annually. I believe you're approving it annually. This year, we are asking for some increases. Predominantly, every school building felt the same pain this last year. Paper prices went crazy. We struggled to have the paper funds that we needed. So across the board, you'll see everyone increase their paper costs. And then Donovan had some reevaluations of their fees as well. So I used this example previously, but this is the best example. The recorder, we were charging $4. Well, it cost us $6. So we increased that cost to cover the cost. So
And every parent thanks us for those when it's time to learn that instrument.
true.
So just as a reminder, like fees, and we've tried to work with our administrators on this, fees are for things that are consumed that do not last from one year to the next. So the recorder is not shared with other students, for example. Art supplies in an art class in third grade, once you paint, it's done. And so that's the purpose of these fees. We try to keep them as low as possible. But that's what we've asked them to really make sure that what they're spending the money on is something that, charge the $6 for the recorder, but don't charge $6 for something that costs $4, making sure that we have, those accurate, numbers on that.
Okay. J is the approved the Lebanon City Schools breakfast lunch prices and the free reduced application for 23-24.
Are there any
So-
questions on lunch prices?
Yeah. The application itself is coming from the federal government. We don't have an option, right? There are slight increases in the lunch fees. You all know supplies. We've been talking about this since I got here. Materials and supplies costs have gone up. So we're increasing slightly. They did a comparison in building these increases. They did a comparison of our local school districts, and we were on the low side already. So they've increased it not anywhere near the high, but we are hopefully not so low that we can't function. So we're hoping to be able to increase costs in order to maintain all of our capital needs through that program as well, which will save on the capital permanent levy fund.
The
So-
fr-
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, the free and reduced lunch forms, they can fill out online now.
They can do it
correct?
electronically or in paper pencil, yes.
Okay.
So one of the things, if you see the bottom of the fee structure, it mentions a PLE tool. It's a paid lunch equity tool. It's a worksheet. They work through it to decide based off of the expenses, based off the number of lunches that they sell, how many free and reduced lunches. It's a formula to figure out lunch prices. So we don't just willy-nilly choose these things. They go through a process, and the paid lunch equity, which comes from the Healthy, Hungry-Free Kids Act of 2010, which is a federal school lunch program, the National School Lunch Program. That's where that comes from. So just in terms of, if you ever have any questions on how we set lunch prices, that budget is supposed to cover, right? It covers the cost of the employees, it covers the cost of the food. It's a zero-sum, operation. Can't make money, but it's also not supposed to lose money. And so they use that calculation to help do that.
So as a really good example, this year in our 10-year capital plan, our PI fund, which is where the PI levy is going into, is covering the cost of a steamer. Well, that is a cafeteria expense. It should have been covered by lunch fees. But because we were only collecting enough to cover salaries and the actual supplies, we couldn't cover that. So hopefully with this increase, we'll start to develop a better plan, move that out so that we can use that PI money for things that are not cafeteria related.
With this, where do we stand currently on the unpaid lunch fees? Has that improved?
I don't have just lunch, but I did ask for an update on our student fees in general. So if you won't remember this, but back in February, all of our student fees, we had outstanding at $493,000. As of this morning, we have $223,354. And that is just for this fiscal year. That is not the other past years, but that is for this year. So since February, we've gone down significantly, but that is student fees. I'm not sure what the lunch fee is, so I can get that for you and get that back to you.
We've had several organizations that have been very supportive of the lunch fees.
Yes.
And it would be nice to let them know how that's progressing.
Perfect. I will get that for next month.
Then item K is the approve the field trip rates for non-school events and personnel rate charges for the 23-24 school year. So I have a question on this because it talks about field trips, but I think that's probably just kind of it doesn't seem like it fits to have custodial or food service under a field trip. Is that just the heading that it happens to fall under?
So the field trip rates for non-school events would be if we were renting our buses to somebody. There's the and in there, the personnel rate charges is if we were renting out our facilities to somebody. So
So
there's
this
two
is field
separate.
trips coming in as well.
So there's, the first part of that would be field trip rates for non-school events would be the bus driver cost and the mileage cost. Then the and portion of it, the personnel rate charges would be as if they were using
Gotcha.
our facility.
Okay. All right. Any other questions on items A through K under financial? Mrs. Irvin, roll call, please.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Mrs. Dalton?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Item number 8 is a public records request. There is one on here. Looks like it's already been completed. Is that correct?
I would have to look.
Yeah, it's in the packet that
Yeah.
was
Okay.
done in June. Sorry, that was redundant or question I needed to ask. Item number 9, I need a motion to approve the final reading and approval for the following policy, policy 5330, use of medications. Just need approval to start discussing.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so I think there are still some concerns with the, I'll let all of you chime in as well, but with the burden that this could be putting on the nurses. I'm not sure that the policy itself calls out which school this would apply to, or even if it can call out what school.
So the policy, and we've asked, in terms of just keeping policy as kind of general, that's the normal practice with policies to be general. So changing from all medications to prescribed medications, and then the administrative guidelines. And so I shared even today, again, to have it in one email with the board, what the administrative guidelines would look like. So specifically what we heard from the kindergarten through 8th grade, the nurses in those buildings, was they did not think that this was a practice that they would support at this point in time, based off the number of kids that even asked for that in their building, the concerns with kids not being able to communicate whether they needed something that required medication, my tummy hurts, whatever type of thing. The request originally came from high school nurses to begin with. They believe that this would actually lessen their workload and help expedite and get kids back to classes and improve that flow. They were willing to be a part of that. The other thing, and what we've said to nurses all along, is our current policy says that we cannot give out any medication unless it's prescribed by a physician. We have a practice in our district that overnight field trips and long field trips, parents fill out a form, medication is given even if there's without a prescription. So that practice will either have to change, or our policy will either not be able to do that for overnight field trips anymore, or we need to change our policy to reflect that. The recommendation from Neola was, not to include all of that in this situation, in that situation. That is more appropriate in administrative guidelines. So I tried to include information in, this that I sent along today, which was more of what the rationale was, the discussion that we had, and then even in the back of it, some practices of kid comes to the clinic, says, my arm hurts. Why? Was throwing baseball last night. I've got the form to give them ibuprofen. The nurse would then call the parent and say, can we give, Isaac ibuprofen? So it still was accompanied with a parent phone call. It just meant that the parent didn't have to drive the ibuprofen to school. And so that was, we walked through some of those things, the administrative guidelines with that. What questions you may specifically have, if you're not in favor of it, then, I would say that you vote the way that you want to vote on it. The request was made by our high school nurses, and the way that it would roll out at this point in time would be at the high school level only, or on overnight field trips, which only happens right now with the junior high to DC and high school programs anyway.
So my request might be to go back and appreciate Neola's recommendation, but that is just a recommendation. So
It
we
is.
can put the language in here saying 9 through 12 only, field trip scenarios. That's my take. I would rather that stuff be in writing, and I know they're saying don't do this scenario, that, but I think in order to alleviate question, it would be better to actually put it in.
That's fine.
So we'll do it.
I would prefer it that way.
I would prefer it that way.
So,
The exception.
so I guess I would ask the question then, is it,
And I do have a question. If we did it just high school, we would still be purchasing the over-the-counter medications and have here?
yeah, so they would buy like a 500 count bottle of ibuprofen that they would have in the clinic, or acetaminophen or whatever. The reason being is that then you wouldn't have 1,600 bottles of ibuprofen in a medicine cabinet to have to look through. And so they would have, you can buy it. We have the ability, we even mentioned, I think that our special services director mentioned, using student wellness and success funds. Like there's things to be used for, student wellness initiatives, clinic expenses, things like that, that it would be, there's a fund that we can pull that from. Or you have to then, deal with everybody bringing in their bottle and having a lot of containers to use. I would say that the schools that have it, they provide it because it's easier for them to manage. I don't know what your child's school uses. You sent me a form that they
Yes.
have. Do they
Yeah.
provide the medication or?
Yes, for just simple, I guess it doesn't cost that much. So I'm not sure how much it's actually used or.
We purchased at my previous district a 500 count of ibuprofen and acetaminophen, and they maybe had to buy another one. It wasn't, they're not going through this on a regular basis. It's not every period, every day, people getting medication. So,
So do we need to vote as it appears today, or do we?
we
table
could
this?
modify it. I guess I would ask that, this document that I sent today, so we could include, the problem is, I think at this point in time, the first reading, so we would, what I sent today had like these bulleted points here of for grades 9 through 12, medication may be administered by the school nurse or trained designee only after the receipt of that, that paragraph there. It requires written consent and contact of the parent or guardian before they administer it. It also gave the ability for the school nurse, if they felt like it was being abused or it wasn't appropriate medically, that they would have the ability to say, I'm not going to administer the medication. You're not presenting with the situation to do that.
Is there a limit to the number of times that they could issue that to a student during the school year?
There's nothing that's currently written down. The question that, so one of the concerns that was brought up by our nurses was the concern that we may be masking a more serious medical condition by administering medication. And so they said, what if somebody comes down every day and says they have a headache? Are we expected to give it to them? And I respectfully asked, what do we do now when somebody comes to the office every day and says they have a headache? Well, we let them sit there and calm down, and we send them back to their class. And sometimes we call the parents and sometimes we don't. And so the concern would be, that would be no different than giving them something for their medication if we never let the parents know that they had a headache every day for the last 5 days. So we did talk with the nurses about, if it's something that is being abused or repeated, that they would have the ability to say, you've asked every day for the last week or two, you need to contact the parents and say, you need to get your child in to be checked out. They shouldn't have migraines this often or whatever. So there was nothing written down, but that was more of a medical decision based on the nurses and what they were seeing in terms of patterns. I think that if we got to that level of writing things down in the administrative guidelines, it would be really long, and we would be taking the ability for the nurses to make a decision based off of what they saw in front of them away. And I don't think that there was a cap that anybody recommended. If it was perpetual and ongoing, the discussion we've had with even others in the county was, if it's something that they were regularly using, then they would require them to get a prescription. And the nurses say to the families, your kid is regularly coming to the office to get ibuprofen because of a headache. You need to get them checked out. I think we would leave that with the nurses to make that decision.
So the nurse would have the right to refuse to give.
It's written in it's written in the administrative guidelines. The nurse has the right to say, to decline to administer an over-the-counter medication if the nurse believes that such medication is unnecessary, inappropriate, or could lead to harm. So, if you would like us to include that in the policy, we could amend the policy to include those 2 bullet points that were in the guidelines.
So it would be only the high school for.
9 through 12, and then overnight field trips, which would actually be a middle school thing. a junior high thing as well.
Was there a phrase in there that said that if they could not reach the parent, that they could go ahead and administer?
It was not written in there.
Okay, because I thought I'd read that someplace, and I did not want that to be.
Nope,
Okay.
it was not written there. So it would require a form to be filled out, parents to check off which medication they were okay with the school nurse administering, and then parent consent. And part of that was asking, did you give your kid any Tylenol this morning before they left the house? Is there a medical condition we need to know about that we shouldn't be administering ibuprofen or Tylenol or whatever?
And what were the medications that would be on site?
It was,
Pretty long list. Oh, you mean the one that we would provide?
Right, yeah. No, I don't think it included that much, but I was,
I don't have it in front of me. I mean, it wasn't included in this. It was on the form. So I'd have to look. If the board, if somebody would like to make a recommendation that it goes into the policy before you vote on it, then we can add those 2 bullet points to the policy. And before we vote on it that way.
so to amend the resolution?
To amend the resolution to include specification, this is only 9 through 12 and overnight field trips. And I would take the language that's in administrative guidelines and insert it into the policy.
Couldn't we just vote no and bring a new policy forward with the correct
Absolutely.
language?
You could do that.
It'll be 2 readings.
It's fine.
Okay. Yes.
I mean, it's fine to me. I'm
But if we
sorry.
amended it, can we amend this and pass it, or?
You can do a motion to amend, add the 2 bullet points, and then we would come back to the original approval. You'd be voting
the
on the
amendment.
amendment.
Or if you don't want to amend it, you don't have to amend it and you can vote on it as it is.
Correct.
But it would take a recommendation from the board to include that as an amendment. So. I want to make sure you understand you're not hurting my feelings one way or the other, right? There's no offense to me, right? If you're not in favor of the policy, then it's okay for you to vote no on the policy, right?
Does anybody have a concern if we do just move the bullets? Amend it to
I
move
would
the
like to
bullets?
have like a hard copy that I can look at. I don't want to do it the easy way. If I don't like this, I'm going to vote no. I don't want to just add bullet points. I want to see it and look at it before I
Well, we
vote.
have the administrative bullet points, right? They're in our,
So you're just moving E and F from administrative to
To the
the
policy.
policy itself.
That's what I heard that you would like to include it in the policy. It doesn't, I mean, we have the ability to bring this back again.
but if we bring it back again, it has to go through a first and second reading.
Correct.
So that would put
If we did
it,
it now, you'd be able to have the school
September.
year start with it.
Is there an advantage to have it in a handbook or something for this school year?
Handbooks are already
Handbooks are already
approved. The
Okay.
back-to-school forms is where it would be included.
Okay.
So, but back-to-school forms are already out for people to fill out, so it doesn't matter at this point in time.
So you could also probably do a table until the next meeting. We could bring something back,
I would prefer that.
And that way I can get it to you in writing.
and it's still the second reading.
I think as we look at this, we do have to keep in mind that for high school, 9 through 12, we want to make sure that kids are taking medication safely. And so when nurses aren't able to give that to them, they just ask their friends for it. Somebody pulls something out of their pocket. I mean, I know that this happens. I've had 4 high schoolers. And we want to make sure that if they have a headache or whatever else they might have and they need some ibuprofen, that what they're actually taking is ibuprofen. So the safest way is to make sure that they're getting that from a nurse. How we regulate that, we may need to look at the policy, but understand they're going to find the medication somewhere, and we want them to find it from a safe person, which
I
is the
100%
nurse.
agree that
Yep,
that's happening.
which is the nurse. It happens, it's been happening for years.
And especially at the high school level.
At the high school level, they will, if they
Yeah.
have a headache and they can't get it from a nurse, they'll ask around and get some friend to give it to them.
Oh, I agree with that, yeah.
And that's not always, we all know that that could be anything that they're given. So we want it to be safe, and high schoolers are gonna figure out a way. So we need to figure out the policy and make it safe for them and safe for all the students and the nurses. We want them covered too, of course, but we have to just know they're going to find it. So we have to come up with an answer for that. So if we go into the school year without it, if that's what you guys decide, but I feel like it should be in place because I've always felt uneasy with that. Having to run it up there, to your kids is one thing, but there's some parents that can't, and kids are gonna ask around and find it.
Which is why the recommendation, the request was made by the high school nurses.
Yep.
I'm trying to be respectful of the other nurses who are 100% against it.
Well, and that's why I think the amended to 9 through 12 would do that, right? So I can't really ask for a vote to see if we want to amend or not, but,
Would you, I know it's a little lengthy, but would you read the two
Yeah, I can do
sections
that.
that would go in, just so we
so
all have it?
if we do the amended, if we amend this, the proposal would be, bullet E is for grades 9 through 12, OTC medications may be administered by the school nurse, a trained designee, only after the receipt of request to administer OTC medications form is signed by the parents, and that would happen
Form.
early. In addition to the signed consent, their school nurse or trained designee will contact the parent or guardian before they administer the non-prescribed medication. The school nurse, clinic nurse has the authority and responsibility to reject a parent's request and to decline administer an OTC medication if the nurse believes that such medication is unnecessary, inappropriate, or could lead to harm. That's E. F is overnight field trips. For grades K through 12, OTC medications may be administered by the school nurse or trained designee only after the receipt of request to administer OTC medications form is signed by the parent. In addition to the signed consent, the school nurse or trained designee will contact the parent or guardian before they administer the non-prescribed medications. So do I have a motion to move E and F into policy and out of administrative?
I'll make that motion.
Am I doing this in the right order? Okay.
Yep.
We have a second.
Second.
Okay, so we have amended A. Karen, do I need a roll call now, though, don't
Yes.
I? Okay, so roll call, please.
Mrs. Cope,
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon,
No.
Mrs. Larson,
Yes.
Mrs. Dalton,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
motion carried.
Okay, so now I can go back to do a final reading, which you already have a first and a motion, or first and a
Correct.
second. So we're
Correct.
just voting
On the amended,
on the amended policy 5330.
I have a question,
Okay?
but the policy says before any prescribed medication, do we now have to vote to remove prescribed off the board policy 5330?
it
To
is.
amend it again to take prescribed off.
Because the amended letters said OTC.
The policy A that is listed there, use of medications, the only word that changed was from all to prescribed. So it
taking
now
out the
no
word
longer,
prescribed.
we're taking out the word all and changing it to prescribed medication.
But
Prescribed
OTC.
OTC medication could be administered if the parent fills out the form. It no longer would require a doctor's note.
That's the exception then, to,
Correct. The exception would be, we could distribute over-the-counter medication with a parent form and parent consent.
So,
9 to
so the
12.
term
That would be-
prescribed,
Stays.
no, it needs to be removed because your exceptions are E and F.
So all medication is what you're saying still?
Yes, the word prescribed needs to be removed now of that.
I understand what you're saying, and so it would be except for the exceptions, right? All other medication is gonna be,
Yeah,
is
so
gonna
we're-
require.
Yeah,
So-
so by approving this with the exceptions as written with the word prescribed in, voting positively to add the exceptions is not required because
Okay,
we've
so
already.
you're saying that the original,
Policy said
Polly is-
all.
is-
so you keep the original policy
Keep the
and
ori-
just add the exceptions.
So what
Is that
what he's
you're
saying is you would keep the word all instead of the word prescribed.
Right.
And then the exceptions are except in these two circumstances.
So we need to amend it as well
Correct.
to revert back to all.
So we need another
Another-
amendment? Okay.
So do I have,
I make a motion to amend the,
Yep.
take out,
To revert back to the
Prescribed.
Yep, put all.
go back to all, and then add the two exceptions.
Correct.
What were they?
But then we need
E
to
and
correct,
F.
we have to correct the grammar then, because then it would be before any all medication.
We can correct the grammar. Board policy allows for grammar to be corrected without voting on by the board. So,
okay, so we have a motion
Okay.
to change from prescribed to all and add, do
The
I
two
need to?
exceptions.
Do I need to do
exceptions.
the two exceptions again?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
So we need we have a motion to add another amend to change the word from prescribed to all.
Yes, I'll second that.
Thank you. So we have a roll call on that.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Mrs. Dalton?
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes,
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Okay,
Motion
so
carried.
now, back to our original, and I'm gonna just summarize this a little bit. We're gonna approve policy 53. We have an open motion and second to approve the amended policy 5330, which will include items E and F from the administrative section to policy and revert the word prescribed back to all.
That's what we're voting on.
Yeah. Did I summarize
Got
that
it.
okay?
Yes.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mrs. Dalton?
Yes.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon?
no,
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay. And moving on to item 10, other educational. Have can I get a motion to approve items A and B?
so moved.
Second?
Thank you. Item A would be approving all of the handbooks for the 23-24 school year. Any summary, common themes you want to bring up there?
I don't know that there were common themes. We didn't ask them to change anything specifically. We do ask for these every year, so we do have a couple of new coaches, volleyball, boys soccer, things like that. So we ask that they, provide sort of a summary of changes in the front. I will say this, after going through this process now twice, Mr. Pantling and I have discussed my desire and his to make sure that our athletic handbooks become a little bit more uniform. Some are like one
Yeah.
page and some are 20. And so what are the things that we expect to see in those? And then giving the coaches the ability to fill in some of those details. So hopefully that's a project we can work on in the next year. But I don't have anything specific to point
But
out.
definitely kudos to those that took the time to highlight what the changes were or to give a list of the changes, because even with that, there was still a lot of reading.
Yeah,
And so that really did help, and I appreciate that.
thanks. We'll pass that along.
And item B is an overnight out-of-state extended student trip, 2 different cross-country trips to be made by the team. I think they are paying for these with their 5K that they're hosting. at the end of
Correct.
the
These are
month.
supported through their fundraising efforts.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments on A or B? Roll call, please.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes,
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Mrs. Dalton?
Yes.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Item number 11, personnel. I need a motion to approve items A through R. It's a long list.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Thank you. To read through these, A is a list of resignations. B is employment, these are new teachers,
Can I add
staff.
something real quick?
Yeah,
Grant Gardner, grandson of former Superintendent Herb Gardner.
He's an alumni, too.
And an alumnus.
and alumni, yeah. C is a change of status. D is substitute employment. E is permanent building substitutes, invaluable staff, I will add. F is a couple unpaid days. G is 24 pay supplementals. H is supplementals. This is for LHS cross-country coach. Board is a resolution for non-licensed coaches. J, supplemental volunteer coaches. K is volunteers, the list attached in the packet. L is stipends. M is extended days. N is interpreter services. O is transportation substitute employment. P is extracurricular aid. Q is student worker. And R is long-term certified substitute teachers.
Only question I have is on the extended days. Were any of those changed from previous? Or
No, there's no changes. These are people whose contracts, based off of the teacher contract and the positions that they have. So for example, elementary counselors get 6 days, based on the contract to be here before school starts to work on schedules and things.
So if we, to Esther's question though, if we know that these positions are gonna require it every year, can we just update their contracts to show that, or does it have
No,
to?
so they have a teaching contract, and so this is, so they would be here under a teaching contract, which is 184 days.
So then this,
And so.
this
the other-
fills in for that position.
Yeah, so the other thing is, like, for example, let me see which one here. For example, Melanie Zollner is a integration specialist. Well, she's actually on a teaching salary, a teaching contract. She has 10 extra days. She's the last one on the list. If she were to go back to a classroom, in the middle of a contract, she wouldn't get those 10 extended days.
Gotcha.
So, it's annual, based off of that work.
I know that it, sometimes in the past too, that the number of days have been looked at. And in some cases, they were decreased, and in other cases, they were
Yeah,
increased.
so last
based on
year in supplemental
need.
review, there's a couple things in here that, the supplemental review, which our contract says annually we'll meet with the teachers union to review supplemental contracts. Doesn't say that we're gonna add or what we're gonna do, but we have to meet annually. Not this past summer or spring, but the previous one, we looked at, guidance and negotiations. We negotiated more days for some guidance counselors because there were others that were getting a lot more in the other buildings, but then elementary guidance counselors doing work before school to get scheduling done, but not on contract time. And so we have not modified any of those. I will point out that in some of the supplementals back on page 6 and 7, you'll see that there are some things that are split, like down in the director of bands or different things like that. That was a result of the supplemental review this year, looking at supplementals, how do we get money into the places where it needs to be, but also we have multiple people directing bands at our high school. And so only one of them getting a supplemental, additional time for concerts wasn't equitable. So now that's being split maybe across, multiple people. So those were some of the results of that this year. I don't have anything else unless anybody else has any questions on that.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes?
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Mrs. Dalton?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Item number 12, under other business, we need resolution, I need a motion to approve the resolution to proceed with the renewal permanent improvement levy.
So moved.
Second?
Mrs. Irvin?
Yes, so this is our final step before we take our property tax, our permanent improvement levy to the ballot in November. You approved last month submitting this to the county auditor to get an estimate of what that would look like. He's given us numbers. The first year of collection for this, it's a renewal, it's not new money. The first year would be $1.4 million, and that is about $35 per 100,000 of assessed value. So this document includes those numbers. I will take this, if you approve this, I will take this directly over to the Office of Board of Elections, and we'll get that on the ballot.
And just to reiterate, this is a renewal of a permanent levy that's been in place for a long time.
Very many years. It's gone through different iterations, but for as far back as I have record, we've had a PI levy fund.
Any other questions?
Yeah. Nope.
You said yes. You have a question?
No, I was agreeing with
Roll
her.
call, please.
It's been there a long time.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Mrs. Dalton?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Item number 13, I need a motion to enter into executive session for the consideration, or to consider the compensation of a public employee or official.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Mr. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Mrs. Dalton?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mrs. Cope?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay. We will not be doing any voting once we come out, other than to adjourn the meeting. Thanks for attending. Jeanette, you're more than welcome to stay if you want to hang out in the hallway for a while. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for being here.